Hey everyone, Sure. So my last video was a double video. This one's also gonna be a double video. It's gonna be worth 2 days of lessons. So you can split it up into two, just like you did for the last if you want to, or you can do it all in one, all the way through. If you want us to split it up into two, you can change right about when I change whiteboards, which you'll be able to notice. All right. So we're working on subtracting integers today. The other day we were talking about adding integers. Subtracting, we have a few different rules, but to warm up, we're going to start with adding again. So the other day we were talking about adding integers and said if you do a positive plus a positive and equal a positive, and a negative plus a negative and equal negative. If you all recall that, that's the big takeaway from the other day. So we're going to practice a little bit, get a little warmed up here. So I have -6 plus -2. So if we remember, we have our -6. I wrote them all in red. And if we're going to add our -2, those all are going to get bunched together. Here's our -6. Here's our -2. All those bunched together and leaves us with -8. -8 total. All right, now we're looking at subtraction. I've got -6 minus -2. Now here's my quick tip for you right now. If you ever see a negative next to a negative, so if we have -6 minus -2, a minus plus a negative is the same thing as a positive. We'll talk about that more later. But if you ever see these two together, you can think of that as a positive. So what we have going on here is we have -6 minus -2. Here's our -6. We're going to take away -2. So we have our -6. Here's our -2. Notice they're orange. They're not green. Or not orange, red. So we're going to take those away. And that leaves us with -4. You could also think of that as -6. And like I said, two negatives equal positive. Plus 2 equals 4. Whichever way there makes more sense to you, please use that. Looking at our next one, we have the same idea. I'm going to draw our model out here. Now we have -7, and we're subtracting -2. So we already have -2 out there. Here it is right here. Take away those, leaves us with -5. I took away -2. Notice it wasn't a +2, it wasn't green, it was a -2, so it was already part of it. You could also think of this as negative, make that a positive. -7 plus 2 equals -5. Whichever makes more sense for you. Looking at our last example, we've got -8. Minus -5. I see that double negative here. I know that that means it can be a positive. I could rewrite that as -8 plus 5, which I know would be -3. But if we're looking at our example here, we have -8. If I subtract 5, I'm going to take away 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take that away and bring it out here. What's left behind? -3. Two different ways of looking at that. Whichever makes more sense for you. Keep using that. All right, moving on to our number lines here. A little different way to demonstrate it. Let's see if I can make that nice and even. There we go. So we've got 3. We got a +3, so I know that's where we're starting. We're starting right here at +3. And we are going to -5. Not a -5, just a regular 5. So we're going to -5 from here. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, leaving us at -2. Another way to demonstrate that, use those number lines. I think those number lines are super helpful with negatives. So if you ever have numbers like this that you can do with a number line, write them out. Right, take a look at this next one. -1. I'm starting at -1, and I'm subtracting 5. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Subtracted those 5, gets me to -6. Landed on -6 right there. All right, this last one's a little challenge problem here. I got -2. That's where we're starting, -2. And it's telling me to minus -7. Minus -7. Remember what I said, when you have these double negatives, When you're minusing a negative, that becomes a positive. So I can think of that as -2 plus 7. So I'm going to do that. That's going to work best for me. That's my favorite method to use, is using those double negatives. I recommend, if that makes sense for you, to use that. 2 plus 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, brings me to 5. So those are a bunch of different strategies that you can use models for. Big things to take away from that. If you have those double negatives, you can make it a positive. -6 minus -2 can become -6 plus 2. I'll explain that here in a second. Bringing out my second whiteboard. We got some new rules for when we're subtracting. I want us first to take a look at these two up top. All right. We've got 5 plus -4. Notice it's a little different because we got some positives here. On the other board, we were just working with negatives. Now we got some positives here. All right, +5 plus -4. Adding those together, I can cancel out, just like we did when we were adding the other day. These 4 right here can cancel out these 4. They're opposites. That leaves me with just one left. Equals 1. It's easier for you to think of that. 5 plus -4 can also be thought of as 5 minus 4. That's what we're going to look at right now. All right, 5 minus 4. So we have our 5 right here. We're going to take away 4. We're going to subtract 4, pull those away. That leaves us with 1, yet again. Two different versions to look at that. You can either think of it as 5 plus -4, where we cancel out those opposites and leave us with 1, or 5 minus 4, where we have 5 total and we take 4 away. All right, so here's our big rule. This one can go in your notebooks. Remember, those notebooks are going to be able to be used on different tests and quizzes. So I recommend taking down as much of all of these as you can. Every time that you see one of these, I recommend putting as much as you can in your notes. That makes sense to you. Okay, rules for subtracting integers. To subtract an integer, add its opposite. Now, you might be a little confused about that right now, but let me show you. Okay, so to subtract an integer, we have two integers, 2 minus 5. They're telling me that this rule is I could add its opposite. So I know that this is a 2 minus a positive 5. So I did 2 added its opposite. I know the opposite of 5. We talked about this yesterday. The opposite of 5 is, I'm not going to do equals there. -5, because those cancel each other out. So we're adding the opposite. 2 plus -5 is going to be 3. Oh, excuse me, -3. 2 minus 5, -3. 2 plus -5 is going to be -3. We can use our little diagram there if we want to. We got our 2 there, 2 positives, 5 negatives. See what cancels each other out. These ones are all going to get bunched together to cancel each other out. Leaves us with 3 negatives. All right, looking at the next one. We've got 2 minus -5. Remember my hint there. If there's a negative and a negative, we can use our special rule of making that right into a positive. That's exactly what this rule is. To subtract an integer, add its opposite. So we have 2 minus -5. If we're going to add its opposite, we change this into an add. The opposite of -5 is 5. Look at that. My rule has an actual definition. So what I like to think of is making that a positive, but this rule is the exact same thing. Add its opposite. Big rule right here. And we know this. 2 plus 5 equals 7. We can show that on our diagram again. If we have 2... my marker's not in there. All right, we're going to be done with the diagram for that one. I think you get the gist of it. Yeah, so adding the opposite here. Now we're going to look at it with some variables. We talked about variables the other day. They're letters that represent numbers. They're really good for showing rules. So here we have A minus B equals A plus -B. How did they do that? They added the opposite. They made this into an addition sign and added the opposite. The opposite of b would be negative b. B plus negative b would equal 0. They cancel each other out. So right here we can do a minus b equals a plus negative b. If this makes sense to you, put this down in your notes. That's a good way to show the definition, to show our rule. We also have a minus negative b. We add the opposite, change this into a positive. The opposite of negative b is b, a plus b. These are the same thing, showing a different rule. Let's put that into practice here. We got a few more practice problems, and then that's all I got for you. All right, if it was 44 degrees Fahrenheit, then dropped 100 degrees, what is the temperature? Okay, so I'm going to write this out. I know it's going to be 44 degrees is what we started at. We dropped, so I know that's going to be minus 100. What is its temperature? There's a few different ways we could do this. If we wanted to, we could add the opposite. That would look like this. 44 plus negative 100. Now that doesn't really help me think about this one at all. It might help for some, for this example. I don't think that's too helpful. So I'm just going to do some mental math here. 44, I know if we had 144 and we minused 100, it'd be 44. That doesn't matter for us right now. So I'm going to do 44 minus 100. Thinking about that, I could also think about this as negative 100 plus 44. There's a lot of different ways I can think about this. Use whatever works best for you. I'm just going to stick with the regular just because they're both positive numbers, or they're both positive numbers, and I can do a little mental math here, I know. I know if this was a 50, 50 minus 100 would be negative 50. I know if it was a 40, 40 minus 100 would be negative 60. So I know it's between negative 50 and negative 60. And I can do a little bit more mental math and figure out that we got negative 56 as our final answer. Whatever works best for you, that's what I want you to do. All right, looking at these bottom ones down here. 32 minus negative 3. This is our chance to use my special rule, my favorite rule there is. Changing those into a positive. Make this problem into 32 plus 3. We're only able to change those into a positive because it's a minus a negative. When it's minus a negative, we can change it into a positive. You can think of that as to subtract an integer at its opposite. If you like my other explanation of it, though, use that. And this is some easy mental math at this point. Leaves us with 35. All right, next one. We got negative 40 minus 60. I could think of that using my rule as negative 40 plus negative 66. I think I said 60 earlier. I meant 66. If that makes it easier for you, use that. If this makes it easier for you, use that. If you want to, you can switch these around, and you can do negative 66 minus 40. Oh, just kidding. Negative 66, I meant to say, negative 66 plus negative 40. You could do either of those ways, whatever works best for you. But I know I'm doing a negative and adding more negatives to it. Little mental math there. Negative 40 minus another 60. If it was negative 40 minus 60, I know that would give me negative 100. So I'm going to add another 6 onto that. Negative 106. All right, finally, 2 minus 48. We could rewrite that if we wanted to using our rule. By adding its opposite, we could do 2 plus negative 48. That makes more sense to you. For me, that makes a little bit more sense because now I can think negative 48 plus 2 leaves me with negative 46. There's a lot of different ways to solve these. Pick whichever method works best for you. One of my favorites is right here, finding those two negatives, making it a positive. Another big method is being able to swap things around. Now look at this. I couldn't do 48 minus 2. That's a different answer. But I could do negative 48 and move this over here plus 2. And that still gives me my answer of negative 46. When we're moving problems around, you can switch things like I said, but you got to make sure you're following the same rules. This negative is stuck in front. I can't change this to 48 minus 2. That wouldn't work because this is a positive 2, and this would be a negative 48. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to hop into any of my office hours, send me an email. Yeah, that's what I got. Last 2 days we've been working on subtracting and adding integers. I know a lot of it might be review, but the big key things are going to help us get through this year. I know these last 2 videos have been a little longer, but it should be one for each 2 days. Thanks for listening. Make sure to record as much as you can those notes, do those Ed puzzles, and get started on that homework.